Okay, which I'll read out to you. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound. So, all the way through the studies of Revelation that we've been doing, right from kind of the beginning and the 7 churches that we looked at and so on, and then when it became, the vision where a door opens in heaven and we get these just very unusual sort of pictures and images, all the way through, I've emphasised a symbolic reading of the text rather than kind of literal. And I appreciate, right, this isn't always easy. There are something, it's not easy for me preparing the study because, I get probably 2 to 3 days to really kind of get into it, research it, and come with something that I can expound. So I'm not making excuses, but I've done the best that I can. And this week it is particularly difficult and tricky. But if you're finding it difficult, you're like, oh, this is, why do I have to do Revelation? Because it's just so hard to understand. To be honest with you, it probably isn't any harder than Ezekiel, Daniel, Isaiah, any of the prophetic books of the Old Testament. So once we get a handle on understanding the book of Revelation, I think it will equip you to go and tackle those Old Testament books. You'll have something in mind as to how to interpret the text. So, like I say, I do understand that for one or two, I found it kind of difficult. But for others, the feedback that I'm getting is they're saying it's kind of given a whole new understanding to Revelation, and it's now not a book they're afraid of. They're kind of like, okay, let's have a look at it. And I think that's a really good outcome from these studies. So remember, this is a vision, it's a prophetic vision, and it has a lot in common with 2 particular books of the Old Testament, Daniel and Ezekiel. Therefore, I think a symbolic kind of, would you say analogous, kind of an analogy sort of making understanding of it is logical and biblical. And most people go wrong, I think, when particularly with this section here, when they start to interpret these verses as relating to some kind of astronomical phenomena, something that's going on in the sky. Because of course it says the sun, the moon, the stars, and they're like, oh, so something's going to happen up there. So again, you've got these 3 objects, the sun, moon, and the stars. But I've tried to sort of stick to 3 methods of interpretation. Okay, number 1, chronological, historical explanation. What I mean by that is so that as we're going through Revelation, it's like this thing follows on and then something else follows on historically, so that it's not like a bit here, a bit there. It's kind of following a logical path through history. This is history that's affecting the church. That's what I mean by chronological, historical explanation. 2, I've tried to be consistent with biblical symbolism. So I've tried to look at the symbols that are used and say, well, is there anything else in the Bible that looks similar to this, that's the same sort of language, that will help us understand what it's saying? And then thirdly, a contextual understanding, so looking at it in the context of Revelation, what's Revelation all about, and so those 3 kind of things hopefully will help us. So we start with this idea of the sun was smitten. Now, other symbolism in the Bible, in Ecclesiastes, King Solomon has a phrase that he repeats, and that phrase, you probably heard it, is there is no new thing, or there is nothing new under the sun. Now he's not sort of, his focus isn't the sun itself. It's, in other words, there's nothing new happening on the earth. It's like things repeat themselves, you know, politically, historically, what would you say, philosophically. You know, things repeat themselves. There's nothing new under the sun. You know, speak to like old people when, you know, when your kind of teenager comes home dressed in the latest fashion and they go, oh, I used to wear that 20 years ago. It's like there's nothing new under the sun. It's just like repeats itself and goes in cycles. And so when he's talking about the sun, Solomon, his focus isn't the sun. It's actually what's going on the earth, because that's under the sun. And so what I think the focus that we should have here is not sort of up there, but down here. And so this is confirmed by the context, I think, which talks about the inhabitants of the earth. So it says here in Revelation 8, the inhabitants of the earth. So there's a consistent biblical symbol or symbols that can be found in Ezekiel 32. So if you want to have a look there. Ezekiel. So after Lamentations, you've got Jeremiah, Lamentations, and then you've got Ezekiel. Yes. And it's 32. No, that's not what I want. I've written it down wrong, I think. Oh, that's annoying. Hang on, sorry everybody. We'll cleverly edit this bit out, so no one...
He has it just New Testament, not Old Testament.
Right, so it's, I think it's verse 7, sorry, not 22. Yes. So verse 7 says, and when I shall put thee out, I will cover the heaven and make the stars thereof dark. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon shall not give her light. So again, it's just talking about, you know, warfare, and you know, in some ways it could be that the stars are going out, the sun's going out because people are dying. It's like, you know, you won't see them again. But it seems to be to do with, this one is a lamentation for Egypt, in other words, God's judgment. So it seems to be a time of judgment or of war, and there's a similarity of the phrases that are used here as are used here in Revelation 8. Part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, and the third part of them was darkened. So I think this is talking, yes, about a time of war. As we've seen up to now, there's been so much kind of warfare, isn't there, and bloodshed that it's been warning against. So the sun is smitten, or if you like, eclipsed. An eclipse doesn't happen just like that, but by degrees. Again, the phases of the moon occur over a period of time, don't they? I think it's about, is it 30 days or something like that, the phases of the moon. So if we're following our time, our chronological time, last week we looked at Arius as being the star wormwood that falls to the earth. So he dies in about, I've got the date here, 336 AD. So the next huge world kind of event that happens is really what you might call the death throes of the Roman Empire. We've seen that the Roman Empire is, kind of crumbling and so on. But round about from 406 to 476 AD, you've got the Goths and the Huns, Attila the Hun, heard of him, just coming in, pouring into Italy and Rome, until finally we have there's a barbarian leader called Flavius Odoacer, so we even have his name, and he kills the last emperor of Rome, the child emperor, Romulus Augustulus. If I've got that right, I got to get a nod from Will, that's always reassuring. So this, according to historians, this is exactly how they mark the end of the sort of Western Roman Empire, that we, all that massive power that ruled the world. It's like this event is like so significant because it's the actual end of that empire. So yes, real places, real historical events, but foretold in symbols. And just as a solar or lunar eclipse, the darkness covers the sun and the moon sort of gradually, in the same way the fall of the Roman Empire was a gradual thing, the glory of Rome is sort of put out by degrees. Imagine like an eclipse, like the sun getting kind of darker and darker and darker and darker. Have you ever seen an eclipse? It was amazing. I actually seen an eclipse when I was working in Ashton, and it was just so weird. Everything, all the birds. The shop next door had this little cage with birds in, and all the birds suddenly went silent. Everything went deathly silent, and they said you could look at the sun with, if you had like we had a welding mask at work, so it's welding mask, and because you can't look directly at the sun, but you could just see it. It was so strange. It went completely dark, and then it didn't take long, but then the light came again from the sun, and you get a kind of from the sun when it kind of shows itself. But anyway, yes, it's a gradual putting out of the light, and we have this gradual ending of the Roman Empire. That's a significant thing, because all the churches at that time sort of, I would say, within the Roman Empire, so it's going to affect them, because that power that was keeping control has now gone, and that's going to be significant in a minute. So it goes on to say in Revelation, "And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound." So it's warning, saying there's three more angels to sound, and it's like woe is like, how would you say it? Something bad's going to happen. Woe to you. Something terrible is going to happen. And theologians they split this up into what's called the three woes. So each woe is significant. It marks a different but significant event. And again, I'm relying on John Wesley's interpretation of this, as he relied on a guy called Bengelius. He sort of said, well, I think this guy's got it right, so I'll just use his teaching, and it's like, well, there are some great teachers in the history of the church, so let's find them and let's use their teaching. When it comes to something like Revelation, you've got to do that, really. All I'm doing really is expounding what he's saying, researching it and then giving you the information. So the first woe, in about 386 AD, so it's just about, 50 years after the sort of Arian controversy, or after he dies anyway, we see the birth of a guy called Nestorius, and he brings in another heresy called Nestorianism. It starts off with his teaching, but it does expand later on. Other people take up his name and teach the same thing. So what's Nestorianism? Well, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, it denies the reality of the incarnation and represents Christ as a God-inspired man rather than God-made man. So I looked into this. It is really quite complex and subtle. So if you're really interested in what it is, I can send you a link to find out more, but I can't really do. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not a theologian. I'm a pastor, so I can only give you a starter on this. But it seems a more complex and more subtle heresy than Arianism that we looked at, and therefore it's more dangerous, isn't it, for the church? Because the first one, Arianism, it's like, yeah, we can spot that pretty easy, you know, yeah, we know Jesus is God. But this was more complex, it was more difficult to spot. But it's worth giving thanks as well that, you know, in the early days of the church, we had some phenomenal teachers in the church. Irenaeus, Athanasius, who defeated Arian. You know, these people, God raised them up, I believe, to unpick all these fiddly kind of heresies and keep the church pure and keep it, you know, sound in biblical doctrine. And that's what we need today, isn't it? We need to pray God will raise up sound teachers, you know, who will just reject this kind of falsehood. So that's the first woe. Is this is Arianism? Not Arianism. Is Nestorianism. But it's worth remembering that these heresies, they usually deny in some way the deity of Christ. That's one of the hallmarks that I've seen. All the different heresies that come out, they usually are attacking the fact that Jesus is God. They're trying to say, oh, he's not God, or he's a lesser God, or something like that. And we read, didn't we? Wesley says Arius was the inlet to all these heresies. Do you remember? He's like, he comes first, but then after him is going to come all sorts of heresies afflicting the church. That's the first woe. The second woe, according to Wesley, is the rise of the Saracens. So the Saracens come from, if I've got this right, the west of Saudi Arabia, which I think is where Mecca is situated. And in time, that term Saracens will become just another way of saying Arab Muslims. And they start to rise at this time. They start to grow, I guess you'd say. So the third woe, again according to Wesley and Bergelius, is the rise of Pope Innocent I. Now, this is very specific. Okay, he's not the first pope, but under him, the Roman Catholic Church, or the Church of Rome, grows massively in power and in influence from about, according to my research, from about 400 AD onwards. So we're kind of moving from the 300s through to the 400s AD. You can check that out. I don't mind being corrected on if my dates are a little bit out there, but that's as far as I can work out. That's how it's going. So, as the old Roman Empire dies, what we have are sort of preludes, preparations made by Satan to oppose the church, of Christ. These are like things, like little seeds that have been planted. Those three that I told you, yeah, the kind of Nestorianism, the rise of the Saracens, and the third woe, Pope Innocent I. These are little kind of things that are just growing. Paul warns in 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 7 to 9, he talks about the mystery of iniquity, or of lawlessness, your translation might say. That this will be working and sort of active, kind of behind the scenes, that Satan is sort of working behind the scenes. And again, this is my understanding of this has changed over the years, because it talks about in 2 Thessalonians there, it talks about how that which restrains is taken out of the way. Do you remember reading that bit? So and people say, oh well, it's the Holy Spirit, he's restraining. I don't believe that's the right interpretation now. From what I've read, what is restraining these things from growing is actually the Roman Empire, is the rule of law and order. And once the Roman emperor is killed and the Western Empire collapses, there's nothing to hold back these other powers which have been growing. And what happens is they start to assert themselves, they start to grow stronger. So we've got this new phase now of the church. So, you know, the church was being persecuted by pagan Rome, right? And that's gone now, that's out of the way. But now there are new elements that are growing, new sources of power, new power bases that are growing up, they're going to start afflicting the church. And so this is why the angel is saying, woe, woe to you on the earth, because this is, there's going to become a difficult time coming. So, just to kind of recap, this is what will be happening, and has happened, by the way. The true church will be attacked doctrinally, physically, in terms of martyrdom. Also, false religion will be conceived and developed, and the fake church will multiply and will grow stronger. So we're looking basically, to put it really simply, there are three things that is warning about. The roots of the rise of Islam, the roots of the rise of Rome, or the rise of Roman Catholicism, because the roots are sort of already there, and the spiritual and physical threat to Christ's church from both of those things. And that's going to be, it's going to be very much what we're looking at through the rest of Revelation. Those two themes will be kind of playing out as we study through it.